And now Harlem was shifting too. Soon, a man would be coming home from prison. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. A black gangster with respect in both Harlem and Little Italy. He was doing time for a narcotics charge, but never ratted out his Italian friends. He was smart, polite, played chess, and carried weight on the street. When Bumpy came back, he was tied to a rising figure, Malcolm X. The civil rights movement was boiling. Harlem was alive. And in 1960, Fidel Castro himself came to Harlem. He stayed at the Hotel Theresa. Malcolm X was there. And Carlo Gambino, watching it all unfold, knew the game was changing. In 1950, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson beat a numbers charge after cops caught him with slips while trying to pull a friend out of trouble. Word spread uptown that he might crack and spill on the whole gambling setup, but Bumpy didn't talk. Instead, whispers spread that Harlem's bankers were getting restless, furious at the kickbacks demanded by cops. Brooklyn's grand jury was already tearing into graft and gambling, and people wondered if Harlem was next. The following year, Harlem's calm broke wide open. Federal agents moved on a massive narcotics operation. 12 men arrested, 60 workers on the street, 300 junkies served daily, even school kids. At the top, prosecutors named Bumpy Johnson. He wasn't just Harlem's gambler anymore. The feds painted him as an overlord, running a $1 million dope network. Nothing moved, they said, without his approval. Bumpy denied it all. He was a businessman, he said, with dry cleaning shops and apartment houses. But the indictment told a different story. A wholesale operation feeding smaller dealers, his supply lines reaching outside New York, maybe overseas. Bail was set at $25,000. He paid it and walked. Harlem saw him hauled off in handcuffs, then saw him back on 7th Avenue the next day. Sharp suit, cool smile, the street still his. The pressure didn't let up. That summer, a grand jury hit him with fresh indictments, linking him to 27 others. The feds called him one of the vice overlords of Harlem. Alongside him were Italian names, Di Martini, Traina. Men, the government said, had 5 years' worth of heroin stashed away. It wasn't just Harlem anymore. The game was bigger. Then, in 1952, somebody put 3 bullets in Bumpy Johnson's chest. He survived. Cops chased a suspect known as the Hawk, but the motive was a mystery. Harlem talked. Some said it was payback, others a warning. Either way, the message was clear. Even Bumpy could bleed. By 1953, Harlem's gamblers were back in the spotlight. The Joe Walcott-Rocky Marciano fight had the neighborhood on fire. Wagers stacked up, 60 grand, maybe 100. Bumpy was in, laying money down like everybody else. He wouldn't say how much. Harlem guessed plenty. By 1953, the walls finally closed in. Federal prosecutors put Bumpy Johnson on trial, charging him with selling and conspiring to sell heroin. His partner and lifelong friend Nat Pettigrew went down with him. The case was brutal. An all-white jury, 11 men and 1 woman, deliberated 2 hours and came back guilty on every count. The government story hinged on 2 black witnesses, Agent William Newkirk, posing as a hustler from Buffalo, and James Cy Hunter, a Harlem snitch. But the real blow came from inside Bumpy's own circle, Freddie Flash Walker. Flash was a kid Bumpy had once saved from sleeping on pool tables. He gave him work, first as a houseboy, then running numbers. But on the stand, Flash swore Bumpy had pushed him deeper, sending him downtown to pick up packages of heroin, $10 a trip. Then Flash admitted he tried to muscle in on Bumpy's connections, moving heroin on his own. He got caught, cut a deal, and came into court telling the government story. Bumpy hit back. He said Flash was lying, that the kid had tried running a scam with phony checks, and even dragged a white girl from a wealthy family into it. When Bumpy found out, he laid Flash out cold on 7th Avenue. After that, Bumpy claimed, Flash wanted payback and helped the feds set him up. A former postal clerk, Lovey Hamilton, took the stand, and backed Bumpy. She said Flash tried to rope her into planting dope in Bumpy's apartment, threatening to kill her when she refused. He gave her a diamond stick pin to pawn, stalked her when she ran, and finally shook her down for a camera just to scrape up cash. Her testimony painted Flash as a hustler, willing to burn anyone to save himself. It didn't matter. Harlem gamblers, numbers men, Bumpy's wife and daughter all packed the courtroom, but they watched him fall. When the verdict came, his wife screamed. Bumpy didn't flinch. "Don't cry, baby," he told her. "It's the breaks in the game. Somebody loses, somebody wins." On June 12, 1953, Judge Edward Dymock gave him 15 years and a $9,000 fine. The government called him the crime boss of Harlem, the king of numbers and narcotics both. Bumpy Johnson, Harlem's granite man, was going away again. When Bumpy Johnson went down in 53, Harlem started asking the only question that mattered: who's next? On 125th Street, the know-it-alls swore the Underworld was dead, cleaned out since Kefauver's commission tore through the city. But it was a lie. The hustlers and gamblers all knew the truth. Bumpy's prison stretch left a vacuum, and the hopefuls were already circling. They talked tough in bars and pool halls, but none of them had the steel. The East Side mob still held the purse strings, and when their collectors came uptown in sharp suits, Harlem's loudest voices went quiet. Everyone knew Harlem might have the faces, but the Italians held the muscle. Inside Danbury prison, the story was different. Bumpy had enemies waiting for him at the chess table: Red Dillard Morrison, Fess Taylor, and Skeets Hoffler. Old Harlem names locked up and bitter. They said they were saving him a seat, waiting to settle scores. Their hate went back years, to a night when Red Dillard slashed Chink Cunningham nearly to death, and Bumpy, playing avenger, stormed past cops and gangsters at Sydenham Hospital, just to slap Dillard in the mouth as he lay bleeding. Later, gunfire crackled on 14th Street when Bumpy and Red crossed paths again. They both lived, but the feud never died. Now, behind the walls, they wanted their revenge, and they mocked the confidence with which Bumpy shrugged off his 15-year sentence. Bumpy still thought he'd beat the case. He filed his appeal, smiling in court, telling his wife it was just another hand in the game. Harlem gamblers whispered maybe he'd walk. But in December, the U.S. Court of Appeals slammed the door. Judges Frank, Swan, and Medina upheld the conviction. 3 counts, 5 years each, stacked back to back. 15 years. $9,000 in fines. Nat Pettigrew, his old running mate, was already deep into his own 22-year stretch. Harlem said Nat was beginning to regret keeping his mouth shut. The handouts promised for his silence had dried up. Bumpy Johnson, the man Harlem once looked to as its rock, was now free on bail for the moment. But the court had spoken. The East Side mob was still eating. The Harlem boys were too scared to claim the crown. And in Danbury, 3 old enemies waited, plotting the day Bumpy finally walked through those gates. The new year in Harlem began in silence. No brass bands, no crowded bars, no rowdy noise on 7th Avenue. Just tension. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson had surrendered to federal marshals the week before Christmas, starting a 15-year bid for narcotics. He'd vowed years earlier he'd never see the inside of a cell again. Now he was on his way to Leavenworth. His last-minute appeal for Supreme Court review was denied, the mandate clear. Guilty on 3 counts, 5 years each, consecutive, plus $9 grand in fines. On the street, the surrender cut deeper than the sentence. Bumpy had been more than Harlem's gambler, more than its dope king. He was the mediator, the man who kept uptown's bankers and the East Side mob from cutting each other's throats. With him gone, the balance was gone. For years, Harlem's numbers men had swallowed smaller cuts, letting the Italians walk in wearing Brooks Brothers suits, collect envelopes stuffed with housewives' nickels and porters' dimes, and stroll back downtown untouched. Bumpy was the one who made it work, the referee between Harlem pride and East Side muscle. Now the East Siders wanted it all. In back rooms along 7th Avenue, the old policy barons held quiet meetings, searching for a successor. None emerged. Everyone knew the job came with more than tribute. It came with a target on your back. Harlem's hustlers grumbled, some vowing to fight, swearing not to let white interlopers strip the neighborhood the way they had the bars and taverns years before. But talk was cheap. Without Bumpy, there was no one left with the weight to enforce it. Inside prison, the fight shifted to the courts. His lawyers filed writs, but the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear the case. 15 years stood. Then came the transfer. By spring of '54, Bumpy Johnson was no longer in Kansas. The feds shipped him west, to Alcatraz, the Rock, home of the hardest convicts in America. The FBI had never broken him, but they were still taking shots. Agents went after his wife, Mamie, trying to seize her Cadillac, claiming it was Bumpy's. She refused, telling them they'd have to take the keys from her by force. Harlem's toughest man was locked on an island in San Francisco Bay. His empire was collapsing, his rivals circling, his enemies waiting. But Bumpy Johnson's name still hung over 125th Street, heavy as a shadow no one dared step into. By the winter of 1954, Harlem was marking time in a new calendar, AB, after Bumpy. 1 year since Johnson surrendered at Foley Square, Harlem's underworld looked unrecognizable. The empire willed to him by Big Joe Richards had splintered, its pieces snapped up almost overnight by white bankrollers from downtown. The Italians and their midtown allies now ran the numbers spots, the horse rooms, even the dope corners. Harlem's operators, once kings in their own right, were reduced to errand boys, or casualties. Two of the men who inherited Bumpy's gambling roots, Bohack and Black John, were swiftly busted. Nobody believed it was luck. The whispers said they'd been fingered by the same white interests they thought they could outplay. The rest of Harlem's independents fared no better. Black policy men faced constant raids, while white drops ran untouched. Small operators disappeared, squeezed out by cops, politics, or bullets. The few left were clinging to the edges, watching leather satchels full of nickels and dimes, once Harlem's lifeblood, walk straight downtown. Even Bumpy's enemies admitted it. If he did nothing else, he kept the white boys out. They feared him, feared the weight he carried. Without him, Harlem was wide open. The shift didn't stop at 125th Street. The Bronx, once Little Harlem, was in the middle of its own silent war. Negro bankers trying to hold numbers routes, while white rivals pressed with political backing. Brooklyn told the same story, white combines coining fortunes, while black operators were hounded by cops, even those paying off. In Queens, the rackets stayed small, candy stores and barbershops running penny ante numbers, while one lone hustler controlled the borough's heroin. Westchester saw the last of its black racket barons die or retire, leaving the field to white operators without a fight. Harlem's only answer was talk of war. A few stubborn bankers vowed not to be pushed out, swearing they'd fight for what was left. Reports surfaced of torpedoes imported from California, spotted in bars along 7th Avenue. To some, it looked like Bumpy was still pulling strings from Alcatraz, laying groundwork for retaliation. Inside the prisons, the landscape had shifted too. His old partner Nat Pettigrew was sick in Danbury. Red Dillard Morrison, Skeets Hoffler, and Fess Taylor, once rivals, now inmates, were broken men. Dillard rumored to be paralyzed after a fall. On the streets, faces from the old days resurfaced. Freddie Parsons back in circulation, Flash Walker, Bumpy's one-time protégé turned government witness, thriving. 1 year after Bumpy's fall, Harlem was leaderless. The East Siders had carved up the pie. The black underworld was scattered, some hiding, some bowing, some plotting revenge. And everyone knew the legacy Bumpy left wasn't peace. It was a promise, violence and bloodshed still to come. By 1956, Harlem was still living after Bumpy. The man himself sat in Leavenworth, but his name still hovered over Lenox Avenue like a storm cloud. His lieutenants were breaking down. Red Dillard Morrison facing conspiracy charges. Fess Taylor hauled in from the federal pen to testify against him. Harlem's underworld was eating itself. And into that vacuum slid a new breed. They weren't the old Harlem goons, loud, sloppy, guns flashing under cheap jackets. These were smooth operators, quiet, sharp-dressed, average age 30, with time already served and lessons learned. They called themselves protection men, but the neighborhood whispered another name, the Black Hand. It started simple. A Lenox Avenue policy baron signed a contract, $50 a week for each numbers drop. After that, every small-timer fell into line. Resistance was met with beatings, sometimes bullets. The protection boys soon had clients across Harlem, numbers bankers, drug peddlers, after-hours joints, even red-light houses. Money flowed. Blood followed close behind. Insiders swore Bumpy's hand was in it. From his cell, they said he was orchestrating the scheme, keeping the East Side guessing and reminding Harlem who really made the rules. Maybe it was myth, maybe it was truth. Either way, his name was still the currency. Then came 1957. Bumpy had always known the Italians. They called it the Black Hand, the Union Siciliana, the Mafia. It didn't matter. It was organized crime, run by Italian bosses with Jewish counterparts, using every ethnic group as muscle. Blacks, Puerto Ricans, Irish, whoever could carry a gun or swing a bat. Then the blood spilled in New York. Costello shot. Albert Anastasia gunned down in a barbershop. Anastasia, the butcher who'd terrorized Harlem's black dock workers, was finally gone. From his cell, Bumpy watched the syndicate crack. The old guard, Luciano Costello, were finished. Genovese was taking his shot, and Gambino was waiting to move in. But Appalachian was different. In November, the Mafia's secret came into the open. A farm upstate, dozens of names he'd heard for years. Luciano's men,